Hello and welcome to this panel discussion on financing our future, mobilizing trillions, transforming systems and empowering global action. This panel discussion is part of the Youth Summit of Plan for the Planet and is hosted by the Evangelische Akademie Frankfurt. My name is Emily and
my name is Viola. So also a warm welcome from my side. And we are both from Greenpeace. We have a facilitator pool there, and this is how we ended up on this stage. We will lead you through this evening. And before we start, I would like to invite Felix Finkbeiner on the stage, so the founder of Plan for the Planet, to address a few words to you.
I'm really grateful for the Evangelische Akademie and our colleagues at Plan for the Planet organizing today's session, that they picked this topic. How do we mobilize trillions for the entire session, but also specifically for tonight's debate? Because this is something that's kind of vexed us at Plan for the Planet and has been with us for a really long time. As you all know, our mission, of course, is to bring back 1 trillion trees globally. And we've worked really hard on this for about 15 years now. And we're quite proud that we've managed to plant about 25 million trees. But when you compare that to the trillion, it's pathetic. It's almost nothing, right? All our achievements together are very, very small compared to what we need globally. That's kind of something we figured out a couple of years ago. And we started asking ourselves, how can we accelerate this? And we kind of figured out maybe the most effective thing we can do is, instead of just focusing on our own work, on the trees we can plant ourselves, is empower all of these other local actors all across the world trying to restore their local ecosystems, help them be a little bit more effective, grow a little bit faster. And to do this, we obviously asked many what's needed, what could we help with? And the first thing we learned that was needed is, of course, restoration advice, and that's why we've created the Restoration Advisory. We've also learned that a huge problem is monitoring, and that's why we built Tree Mapper. But of course, the main thing that keeps coming up is funding, is scaling up funding. And that's what we're trying to address through our restoration platform. And if things go well, in a year or two, we might cross the mark of 100 million trees funded through our platform. And of course, that would be an enormous success. But we're also still very, very far away from restoring 1 trillion trees. So I really hope that we're all going to learn something in tonight's debate that's going to get us a little bit closer to achieving this goal. But in all of this gloom, and I'm sorry to start off that way, there's one thing that does give me a lot of hope in thinking about how we fund the global transformation. And this is quite simply that this global transformation that we do need has become a lot cheaper in recent years. I mean, if we think back, if we imagine that instead of discussing this topic today in 2023, we had discussed this in 2003, we'd be talking about entirely different prices. Why? Because so many of the key technologies we need for this transformation have become radically cheaper in the past 20 years, right? The cost of solar panels has declined by about 95% in that time. The cost of wind energy has declined by about 70%. Not quite as much, but still an impressive achievement. And maybe most importantly, the cost of battery technology has declined by about 96% in that time. Truly impressive progress. Now, there are other technologies that we also need where the decline hasn't been as rapid, like blue hydrogen, for instance. So a lot of work, a lot still has to happen. And we're still talking about big price tags, but at least we're talking about trillions and not hundreds of trillions. So still an enormous task, though, that I hope we'll learn a lot about today. And of course, this has been the topic for us, or is the topic for us, for this entire Youth Summit. So we got to start discussing it this morning with a really interesting talk by Professor Rademacher. We had really fascinating input and discussions during our working group. But I think the most exciting part is yet to come. But I'm not here to reveal who's going to tell us about it. That's the job of Emily and Viola. Thanks.
Come.
At first, I'm going to quickly tell you about this panel discussion. We will introduce our speakers, and then later on there will be an opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. And if you are tuning in through the live stream, there is an email address diskussion@evangelische-akademie.de for any other questions.
Thank you. So, as you can see already, we will have 3 panelists with us tonight. Unfortunately, one is sick, so we have 100% female power tonight. Unfortunately, only one of our guests can join us, but we have 2 guests online. So this is Marie, and Marie is a finance campaigner at Greenpeace. She has been a former long-time manager at Union Investment with extensive insight into the finance industry. Her focus is on greenwashing in financial products and the EU taxonomy. And she's at the moment overseeing the Greenpeace lawsuit against the inclusion of nuclear power and gas in the regulatory framework for sustainable investments. Nice to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Our next guest would have been Professor Saleemul, but unfortunately he is not there, so I'm going to continue with Karishma Ansaram, who you can see on the right side of the Zoom, and she has a PhD in climate finance as well as a Master of Science in carbon finance, and currently she's part of the high-level Climate Champions Finance team as a youth fellow, and she focuses on climate finance for emerging markets and developing economies. She coordinated the Finance and Market Working Group at Youngo in 2021 to 2022, and she has been involved in climate actions in diverse aspects, for example, grassroots projects in Mauritius, as well as attending international conferences and drafting policy papers and many other interesting projects.
Then, last but not least, we have Verena Kröss. She works as an advisor on international finance, business and human rights at the Berlin-based civil society organization, which is called World Economy, Ecology and Development, in short, WEED. So it's an association that is addressing and analyzing the structural causes of global poverty, development and environmental problems, and taking into account the shared responsibility of industrialized nations. Verena's current work's focus is a fairer distribution of the IMF special drawing rights and on the current reform process of the World Bank. And prior to this position, she has completed a PhD on the history of the World Bank. Nice to have you here, Verena. Welcome. So we will start with a few questions that are directed to some of our guests. So we will start with you, Verena. And the World Bank Group claims to be the largest multilateral financier of climate action in developing countries. So in the fiscal year 2022, they delivered $31.7 billion in climate finance. And we would like to know, what is the process or instrument to decide on the distribution of the money? We cannot hear you here, but Karishma seems to hear you.
Otherwise, we would continue with Marie until the technical difficulties are maybe solved.
I'm just looking up.
Okay, we will continue with Marie. So from your experience with Greenpeace, how effective have international delivery mechanisms been in distributing climate finance to those who need it the most?
Yeah, so what I would like to highlight is private finance, obviously, because it's the big chunk that we're talking about. If we look at the global spectrum, most of the money will be private, so coming from, or like managed from banks and asset managers. And we have to look at both sides, obviously. Like, if you look at planting trees, you're putting trees out there, but someone else is taking them down. So you have to see that you're planting trees faster than someone else taking them down. Basically, you can translate that to finance, you have two sides. You are looking at the finance that's destructive, that's polluting, and you want to basically turn off the water tap that's watering this plant of destruction. And then on the other side, you obviously want to see where the money should go, where you want to have the impact, where you want to plant the trees, so to say. So when it comes to transparency, we see that a lot is happening in the EU, especially. That's what I look at. There are a lot of regulations that should have been there for years that are coming now, but you can also see what happens if they're not done right. Because right now we're building a basis for sustainable finance, and if we're not doing it right, as we see with the taxonomy, then we will have a problem later on. And when it comes to accountability, this is obviously the biggest problem. If you look at these big banks and asset managers, they are right now profiting from destruction, profiting from pollution, basically polluting and destructing in the global south, sitting in the global north, profiting from this, and this is obviously something we need to change.
And do you have any concrete examples? What kind of regulations would that be?
So what we obviously need is what the taxonomy was supposed to be. We need a basis to know what is green, where do we want money to go. We also need a basis, obviously, on where we don't want money to go, so like a red list. But what we got right now is this kind of green list that says the money should go there, basically. It's a list of stuff, and stuff that's obvious, like renewables and planting trees, and then stuff that's not obvious and definitely not green, which is nuclear power and gas. And that's why we're fighting it, obviously. And that's like the basis for everything that's going to happen in the EU. And we're talking global level, obviously, but all the countries all around the planet are doing taxonomies right now. We see that in Indonesia, we see that in Australia, we see that in the UK. Everyone's doing their own taxonomy because we realized if we don't speak the same language on what we need, what we mean when we say we have to finance green stuff, then greenwashing happens. That's what we've seen the last years. So right now everyone's working on this scientific foundation to have this language, shared understanding of green. So we see that all around the world, and we see that similar mistakes are happening all around the world. If you see Indonesia including coal plants basically, or indirectly, in their green taxonomy. So we need to be very aware what will happen if we keep letting that go.
Okay, so you mentioned transparency and accountability, but how could young people get involved and help to make things more transparent?
Yeah, for me the first step is learning. This seems, or it is, a very complex system, and sometimes seems overly complex. You could be scared of the system, you don't really understand what's happening. So the first step is to learn about the system, to learn how the financial system, and specifically, so private finance, how does it work? Who are the players? Who's got the money? Who's managing it? And then you can see what the problems are, and then you can start tackling the problems and go out and try to solve the problem.
Thank you. Should we give it another try with the Zoom?
No? Not yet. Okay.
Okay.
So, Marie, we have another question for you. How lucky are we? So, what role do you see private sector investment is playing in financing climate action? And how can governments incentivize this form of investments?
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now that it's making the big chunk on both sides. We have the big chunk of destruction is obviously private finance, even though we also have public finance subsidies that help destruction and pollution. But the most part of it is private finance, so finance that's in the hands of big banks, of asset managers, and on the other side as well, we see that positive or like truly environmentally friendly subsidies are obviously there and coming, and we need them more. But what I am concerned with is trying to figure out what the banks are doing, because everyone's doing ESG now, everyone's doing sustainable finance. You really have to look into that, whether that's really green, as we will need it, because that's like the big chunk of money out there, so we will need that to be green. Or if they're just greenwashing and telling you they're doing something green while not changing anything. So we have this gap between what they're saying and what they're actually doing. And what we can do about this is, first of all, like most of you will probably do stuff that's changing your life choices, changing your consumption style, not eating meat or something like that. We've all or most of us change consumption habits in order to be more environmentally friendly, but most of us don't look at their finances, don't look at which bank they're using, and this will be the next step, to look at that, to make better decisions on that. I know that's generally, like, finance is a scary thing, and most of us just want to keep to the side and not care about it as long as the money doesn't get less, hopefully. But in the future, we will need to make better decisions and be informed better on what we're investing in, what the banks are doing with our money as well.
Yeah, thanks. I know this, for example, from the German culture, that you don't talk about money, so you don't talk too much about your financial institution you're working with. Is there anything, because you say there's a big gap between what do they say what they do and what they actually do, and there's a lot of greenwashing. Can the government do anything to reduce this gap?
The government is actually right now stepping up to the game, realizing that what has happened in the last years wasn't as good as they thought. They were like, oh, hey, everyone's doing green stuff, great, let them do it. And now we have all these greenwashing cases. So we've been quite successful in our fight against greenwashing just recently, when the US SEC put out a big fee for a German asset manager for greenwashing. That was surprisingly big for this context. So they finally step up to the game and say, it's not okay. It's not just, oh, I wrote something that's not, yeah, it's not this little thing. It's not a Kavalierdelikt in German. Is what we say. So they realized that they need to do something. There's a lot of regulation coming again from the EU that I don't know whether that's going to help or make it worse. We will have to see. But they are stepping up to it. The awareness in general in public as well grows. Like, most people will know what greenwashing is or have a feeling. So we don't need to do much explaining on this. So it's very aware, and it's getting more obvious if it happens, I think.
And is there any help, for example, if we or our guests would say, okay, I would like to pay more attention on where am I putting my money in? Yeah, is there any kind of guideline or checklist that I can use to check if my bank is doing greenwashing or actually doing green stuff?
So there are multiple resources on that out there. They are like, I know mostly the German stuff, obviously, so there are lists where you can check your bank. I don't know that by heart. I know where you can check your investment funds. It's fairefonds.info. So you can check what's in the funds, if there are like fossil fuel companies in the funds, etc. And we are also working on like a guide to guide you along, but we're not quite done with that yet.
And this is also then a document that Greenpeace is going to publish and make available for everybody.
Yes, that's what we realized we need to do. We need to put something out there to help.
That sounds really good. And maybe this is kind of a mean question, but do you have any idea, when we look at all the green things out there, what is the percentage of actual green things and greenwashed things?
I guess 5 years ago I would have said like 90% greenwashing. Right now I feel like it's getting better due to the stricter rules in the EU, especially. I'm sorry, I always have the EU focus. But it's just like financial products are so regionally based. We have all this regulation on how like funds stuff can be named. So what is ESG? What do financial products need to do if they call themselves sustainable? When is it ESG and whatever? Like transparency on those claims is also increasing. So it is getting better. I feel like it will be much less in the years to come. But still, we need to make sure, because there are always so many innovative financial products like green bonds, and there will be lots of stuff happening that's combined public and private finance, where you need to make sure that it's not greenwashing. And it will just keep going, but I feel like if the awareness stays high and we like put the finger in and say, we won't let you do this, then I'm hopeful that we will have much. Hello, test.
I think it's better again.
Yeah.
Well, I would have another question concerning the lawsuit of Greenpeace. Could you give us any updates on how successful the lawsuit is so far, or how it is to file a lawsuit against the EU, or against who are you even filing the lawsuit? Could you maybe briefly explain it?
Maybe we'll start there. So the decision to put nuclear power and certain types of fossil gas in the taxonomy is the EU Commission's. So Ursula von der Leyen and the people around her, they decided to put it in basically, I would say, due to pressure from lobbying, obviously, and certain member countries that are highly dependent on nuclear and gas. So this thing that was supposed to be scientific, conclusive, and have this very good basis was taken over by politicizing and like interests that need to be weighed, I guess. So we are suing the EU Commission. Lawsuits are always like a very long fight. We started this last year with a request for internal review. Like it's a very technical thing as well. So we filed the actual lawsuit in April, and now it's this kind of back and forth. So EU Commission is arguing and we are arguing. So it's more like behind the doors, like exchanging written documents with all the legal arguments. And hopefully next year we will go forward and have an oral hearing where we can bring in our experts. But most likely this whole lawsuit won't be done until like end of 2024 earliest, probably later. And the big problem. Okay.
It's really big, the problem.
It's a really big problem. No, the really big problem, as I said, is that while we are while we're filing the lawsuit, this whole taxonomy will be out there, and financial institutions can use it to finance nuclear power and gas. So while we are fighting this in court, it's just there, and people use it. So we will have to tackle that as well.
Shall we now try again? Yes. Okay. So.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, but I would say. We have to mute ourselves every time. Maybe. Okay, we will try it out.
We will try it out.
Because our microphone or our Zoom is normally out, no? Okay, I will try to repeat it. So we are waiting for a cable to solve all our problems in life, and therefore we are going to have a 10 minutes break. Everybody can have a bio break, get a cup of... It's okay, that was a quick 10 minutes break. So now we will try again. Verena, could you say something?
Was that, were you able to understand me now?
Okay, I think we can hear you, just we need to adjust the sound, or... Okay, so we will try to continue again. So Verena, now I have to go back in my questions. Where were we? Okay, I will repeat the first question I had for you. So, the World Bank Group claims to be the largest multilateral financier of climate action in developing countries. In the fiscal year 2022, they delivered $31.7 billion in climate finance. And could you tell us what is the process or instrument to decide on the distribution of all this money?
Okay, so finally we are here with the World Bank. The World Bank is certainly one of the largest providers of the multilaterals of climate finance. But one thing that is, I think, important to know in advance is that it claims to be the largest, and the numbers you just cited is kind of the analysis of the World Bank, what they report as climate finance. But again, to come back to the point of transparency, it's actually impossible to know and to verify whether that number of the 31.7 billion is actually correct or not. Oxfam tried to do an analysis last year for the annual meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, where they kind of tried to verify that number with the information that is publicly available, and it's impossible because the accounting system the World Bank uses of how it classifies project as climate finance isn't transparent. Nobody knows which aspects are counted how and how much the money is counted on each project. So Oxfam in this report found that the numbers could be off also by 40%, more or less. It's just it's another realm where transparency should definitely be improved, because we also have to know with the multilaterals what the numbers actually are to hold them accountable, and also to be sure that there isn't greenwashing. And at the moment, that's not really possible to verify this sum from the outside, which doesn't mean that they aren't a large provider of climate finance, just saying that it's impossible to know which projects are exactly behind this number. And I mean, I don't know if the question on the distribution of that finance is actually the most relevant or interesting one. I would say, I mean, generally, the World Bank is a staff-driven organization, so they have about 15,000 people who work there. It's a country-based model. They do country-based analysis also for climate to identify projects together with the member states in which they are running these projects. And then these projects are prepared by staff and in the end submitted to the Board of Executive Directors, where the member states kind of make the final decision on projects. At least from the numbers, the World Bank reports, they say that half of that sum, at least of the public money areas of the World Bank, are for adaptation needs. Again, I can't verify this, but that's what they say vis-a-vis this distribution between adaptation and mitigation. I personally think the question is more interesting. It's more interesting to ask if it's actually a good thing that the World Bank is the largest provider of climate finance, or if it shouldn't be other institutions doing this kind of job. And this is, I think, a very crucial and kind of relevant debate to have right now, because the World Bank is going through a reform process, which is one of the biggest reform processes that is being discussed in the entire history of the World Bank. It started last year. They are discussing to make the World Bank way more responsible for climate finance and also for other so-called global public goods, and to extend the mission of the World Bank, which is currently centered around the alleviation of poverty. And this will be discussed in the annual meetings of the World Bank next week in Marrakesh. And I think it will have a large influence on how the entire multilateral international climate finance will turn out. And one can say, of course, we are all, I think nobody is really against the World Bank thinking about climate change and having that on their radar. It's obviously good that they I don't know, don't have a president anymore who is a climate change denier. And it's very good that they officially acknowledge that climate change is real and they also have to do something against it. But it's an open question of how fit for purpose the World Bank actually is to do climate finance themselves. And there's also a certain conflict of interest with how much do we want to have climate finance in an institution like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, in which the biggest contributors to climate change, Europe and the US, hold major decision-making powers, and whether it's a good thing that climate finance is being decided in such an institution. So I think that's this fundamental question that is kind of behind it, behind the fact that the World Bank is currently the largest financier, is, I think, the relevant political question to ask. Yeah, I would leave it here for the moment.
Thank you. And you said maybe other institutions should better be the financiers. Can you name any? Or is that to be seen depending also on how the reform goes? And if actually a reform is happening?
Well, so of course, so there are different aspects to the debate, right? So of course, I'm in favor of, and I think hardly anybody is disagreeing on them kind of mainstreaming the thinking about climate change into the projects they are already doing. And that's often the excuse, it's only the entire reform debate is only about that we do agricultural projects anyway, so let's include a climate focus in these projects as well. But we will still support small farmers or whatever we are doing. Nobody is against, or I would say I'm definitely not against that. The question is, where do rare concessional money go? Where does these kind of money flow? And there's a real conflict of interest there that scarce resources that currently, for example, go to low-income countries in IDA, which is like this concessional lending arm of the World Bank, where low-income states get a lot of these resources for more poverty-oriented projects. that some of these resources could go away to then have concessional funds for climate finance. It's also important to say that the World Bank only does loans, right? Like some of these loans are concessional, but they only do loans. It's not a grant-based institution. There are a lot of people who say climate finance generally, from a climate justice perspective, should have way more grant elements, right? The World Bank is not, it's a bank. Like they do bankable projects. They are not in the business of providing grants. And then I think the question, for example, another question is this decision-making power. As I said, like how much do rich countries try to kind of get also climate finance in institutions in which they in the end hold the power? I think it's a problematic tendency. I know that a lot of people are also not so happy with how financial mechanisms under the UNFCCC, so under UN processes work out, but I think it's not a good idea to always put every new responsibility on the World Bank, because they sell themselves very well for being efficient and all of that. And at the moment, they are even starting discussions about how much should the World Bank host like a loss and damage fund or something like that. That it's clearly out of their responsibility, in my perception. It's just that there's a general tendency to put all of these things under the World Bank because they claim to be very efficient, but I think we should strive for building up other good institutions in which especially countries that are the most vulnerable to climate change have a real say in these institutions and real decision-making power in how this money is then distributed.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think we're going to go to you, Karishma. And as you have a Master of Science in Carbon Finance, we are interested in carbon tax and in how far this should be encouraged as an effective climate action to, on the one hand, raise climate finance while also discouraging high-emitting sectors.
Thank you. Thanks, first of all, for inviting me for this event. I'm very happy to join, my youth fellows in this discussion as well. I hope that I would have been there in person to kind of like interact better. And I hope I also get the chance to answer the second question that was there in the list, because I really want to share my perspective on youth-led financing. So in terms of the carbon tax perspective, I think this is mushrooming. We now have like more than 70 initiatives that are in place or will be in place in the next 2 years. And they have gained interest from both developed countries and developing countries as well, which are like either coming up with a carbon tax or a carbon market initiative. That said, it also gives some advantages where it brings some red alerts to some perspective on how it's carried out. For example, if a country is adopting a carbon pricing mechanism, be it carbon tax or carbon trading, then it has, the potential to leverage on it and also to generate some domestic financing to address its issues. But that said, we have seen that this trend is attractive, yes, but there is much more that needs to be done. For example, if we take the pricing itself, the IMF has stated that the pricing needs to be at least $75 per ton, so that it would disincentivize the investment, or even drive a decarbonization. But you can see that while these carbon taxes are being implemented, they are being implemented at different prices in different countries, where we don't know how are they calculated and what is the impact of these carbon taxes as well into reducing emissions in those countries. So it's very important that there is more work behind into unifying the methodology that is used to calculate the price and the rate of carbon tax that is implemented. And also, this should not be like a situation where you are taking the money, as a policy stakeholder where you're taking the money in form of tax, but then you're giving it in the form of subsidies for harmful projects and to high emitters. So when we are taxing like the high emitters, it's also important to stop, subsidizing those investments as well, because we've seen that carbon taxes, they are doing it, but on the other hand, subsidies keep going on to fossil fuel projects. So it's very important not to contradict the ambitions and also the policies that are being rolled out, and most importantly about the funding and revenue that we get from the carbon taxing. I've read some of the papers and reports that mention that we should be holding high emitters accountable under the polluters pay principle, so that some of this revenue from the tax should go to the loss and damage fund as well. So this is another thing that could be used into diverting funding towards adaptation and loss and damage, which is like these two areas, they do not have much attention when it comes to funding, especially the risk appetite of certain investors into the most vulnerable communities needs to be reviewed. So it is a mechanism that can be used. Now coming up to carbon pricing and this form of carbon trading, we can see that we have carbon offsetting, which is very attractive once again. A lot of companies talking about net zero offsetting their carbons, but what's beyond that, we need to see about also human rights and territorial rights, that is land rights in those countries when this is happening, For example, citing also Oxfam report like Verena, which I read that if they did a study, for example, if you're offsetting into forestry, it means that you're also using this land now for forest, not for agricultural purposes, which could lead to a rise in food prices, a deprivation of food products and so on in those countries. So it's very important to see that when we are talking about offsetting, in what form it is done, it is fair, it meets the SDGs criteria, human rights and territorial rights. The same thing happened, for example, in countries where in Amazon region, where those lands were taken from the indigenous communities or even like local communities, they're deprived of their land for, other type of big polluters to come and do their projects. They buy the land and in the name of offsetting. So that said, we need to enhance the mechanism. Yes, it's there, but it needs to be done in a fair way and also in an effective way that it respects all the boundaries, of the local community and so on. And I'll just touch upon, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is still being finalized, the work programs, but it's also looking to how developing countries also can use it to their advantage to transfer their emission reductions. But that said, they should be respecting, all the caveats that I have mentioned earlier with respect to offsetting or even the pricing that is being done, because at the end of the day, we don't want like another CDM or clean development mechanism, to be there, because it has to be something that is not replicated. It's not history. It's not like you're selling a ton of carbon very cheap to other countries that are still emitting. So yeah, these are my 2 pence thoughts on how the overarching mechanism of carbon taxing and carbon pricing is for now, but the debates are very interesting. So I invite the youth in the room to read more about it and also to follow Article 6 of the Paris Agreement if you have a chance to also look into it, because this is very important on the road to COP. Yes, so I'll leave you here until I'm asked to take the floor again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Then we will go back to Verena again, and you mentioned before already the problem of loans. And I, come back to this topic now. So a new research by Action Aid International shows that 93% of the countries most vulnerable to climate disasters are either at risk, either in already or at risk of debt distress. And the majority actually of climate finance is offered as loans, as you already said, to developing countries who are struggling then with other development needs already. So how can we stop this and ensure that finance is received as non-loans or have the climate-induced debt cancelled?
Yeah, I mean, I will start a little bit more with the problem and then present my magic fix for it. No, I'm just kidding a little bit. But so, I mean, this research you just cited, ActionAid published this report that the countries most vulnerable are already in debt distress and or are at the very high risk of being in debt distress. Generally, one has to say that if we look at the world at the moment, a lot of countries worldwide are in debt distress. A lot of countries of the global south, the debt burden and what is paid as debt service is the highest since the 1990s. And after the 1990s, there were debt negotiations and some debt relief. So actually, it's not just a problem for climate finance. I just want to outline it's also a problem for all the basic social achievements in the world. There are multiple countries that are paying way more in debt service than they are paying in education or in health. And yes, climate finance is another aspect that is severely suffering from this, especially much needed investments in adaptation, for example. And so I think we have to, on an analytical level, we have to realize that there's really a vicious circle between debt and climate change, because several reports have analyzed that countries that are under debt distress actually often get locked into, for example, still investing extractive industries and fossil fuel industries that they have, because these are the industries through which you make a lot of foreign exchange reserves, you have export earnings and all of this. So actually also the pressure that comes from debt exacerbates climate change and the climate crisis. And then in the end, the same debt distress it doesn't allow you to make enough investments into adaptation, and then when there is a climate, when there's a actual loss and damage, you can also not afford it. So it's really like a vicious circle that we have to see on an analytical level. But then it's actually difficult what to do about it. I mean, on a larger political level, I would say we definitely need a real debt workout mechanism for states that doesn't exist that far. We know it from Germany and from many other countries. Every company and every private person can file a insolvency case, and it's a more or less regulated process you go through. Yeah, I mean, as a private person, I can declare private insolvency. As a company, I can do it, and there's a court case, and there are regulations. For states, that doesn't exist. Every state has to go to all the debtors and negotiate a deal for debt negotiation, for debt relief, or for just the shifting of the debt burden, and that's not a good idea. And that hasn't worked out over the last years, and at the moment it's also not working out. So the G20 agreed on a framework. They call that the common framework, where G20 countries agreed on a common framework to deal and negotiate debt. They sell it as a major achievement because actually G7 countries kind of managed to reach an agreement with China, which is also a large creditor at the moment for a lot of countries in the global south, that they would do this together. But this process is actually very slow and very inefficient. A lot of countries wait for years to settle their debt, are reluctant to do this, although we know that timely debt workout would afterwards make the situation better. And the big problem is also how to kind of reach a fair burden sharing, because it doesn't help at the moment with the debt situation we have. It often doesn't help to just have an agreement with bilateral creditors, because there are a lot of private creditors who hold a lot of debt, and of course bilateral creditors like states also want a fair burden sharing with private creditors, and that's right. Like, it's also good that public money isn't just that there is not just a public debt relief. All these companies and investment bankers and all of these private money that speculates on making a lot of profit from debt in the global south countries also have to make their fair share. So in the end, we need like a more regulated process that I think should be hosted under the UN, where countries can actually go through like a rules-based process with like some independent expertise on which debt levels are actually sustainable, and to cut these. And I think it's important to stress that, because at the moment a lot of people are just talking about these debt for nature swaps and all of these new instruments. And if they are done well, debt for nature swaps can be a small solution in some states, in some situation, but they don't solve the basic structural issue that is behind it, and they will also never be able to provide the kind of debt relief that we actually need, because they always have to be backed up by either public or philanthropist money, and we need debt relief on a much broader scale. And then we have to think about the fact of how to provide climate finance that is not so debt creating, and we have to think about different categories of climate finance. Adaptation and loss and damage obviously need the largest share of the grants, whereas some elements of mitigation, I guess you can do maybe loan-based. And I don't have a good idea of where to get these grants from. I mean, some Karishma already mentioned, like there have to be some taxes, some cuts in harmful subsidies and things like these that can be used. And I think it's important to emphasize that rich countries also can't shy away from their historic responsibility. We have, for good reasons, in the Paris Agreement, principles of climate justice embedded, shared responsibilities that they have to accept, and there is no quick fix. Like, you have to really get down to the fact that neither investment bankers nor some financial innovation will solve all of these problems. You also have to talk about the fact that climate change is costly, and you actually have to make you have to provide this money because of your historic responsibility. And I think, at least when I look at Germany and when I look at a lot of other rich countries, they really try to get away from that responsibility. And I think we shouldn't let them. We shouldn't let them just talk about financial innovations that will solve everything or something like that. We have to accept the true cost of climate change.
Thank you.
One thing that would interest us as well, Karishma, would be, are there any recent innovations in sustainable finance that have caught your attention, something positive maybe, or how can young people and young entrepreneurs especially contribute to these further innovations?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like to add, maybe I saw this in the notes, but I had this as an example, which, the attendees could further look into the debt for nature swap. But more specifically to young people, I would like to highlight last month in Kenya, Nairobi, during the Africa Climate Week, the African Development Bank, they pledged $1 billion for the youth-led initiatives. And they went beyond, which it's not only about giving the money, but they are having a whole capacity building and mentoring process for, African youth and African young entrepreneurs. And that means a lot. because in one of the reports that we co-authored with the Commonwealth, and this is going to be launched at COP28, where we analyzed what is available as climate finance for youth, because, you know, there is a lot of things that say we are doing something for young people, but then when you see what is available, it's mostly in terms of small grants during competition, and it's in the form of minor amount, like, for example, $500, $1,000, and that's not enough to start, you know, even like with the idea or even like the seed funding that most of these young entrepreneurs need. So if you see that the form that in the notion of climate finance, it's really like not enough, not sufficient, and it's almost like doing youth tokenism when they do that. So we map this out, and this is why I'm saying that seeing such progress or good like example coming from African region is laudable, because we are able to do it, and it's showcasing that, you know, there is hope that much more can be done. That said, it's also to go beyond, you know, just providing the funding. It's also about creating awareness and providing the capacity building that is needed for young entrepreneurs. Last year, during one of the innovation summit at the World Bank, we launched another report on needs analysis that we did for young people to access climate finance. And there we could see that when we interviewed those young people, they do not, you know, they have limited knowledge about what climate finance means. They restricted it only to UN agencies or forms like, public climate finance that could flow. So for them, it's like a high-level thing that they couldn't access it, or even like they do not know where to begin. So we are talking about this type of, you know, capacity building that needs to happen, and also about the flow of climate finance to young entrepreneurs. It's still done through, like, you know, entities that are accredited to the GCF and GEF. And most of the time they are public entities, so national governments that can access these funds. So they would use it and decentralize it to young entrepreneurs. So we are also talking about the flow of the financing to the most needed communities, and young entrepreneurs over there, to be able to drive the solutions, you see. So it's about not only what is available, how to make it more accessible to young people, reviewing the process. Most of those people that we interviewed last year did not even, like, you know, have proper governance to be able to meet the criteria of those funding out there. So it's about reviewing the process, reviewing the risk appetite of those investors coming into the region, and also build the capacity of young people so that they can access those funding. So really, I would invite you to also keep an eye on this report, because this is going to talk a lot about what is available. It maps where this money is coming from, the financing, which institutions are giving it, and also in what form. Mapping the geographies of these funding in terms of stakeholders, youth, yes, but beyond youth, young women, young indigenous people, and so on. So we go down we do a deep dive so that we could speak to different, stakeholders, and we could highlight on what is out there for young people. So I would suggest that, you being a youth in the room, there's so much potential that you can do, but make sure that you're carrying out, the voice of young people, and also you're doing your best so that programs such as Youth Adapt that was there in Africa can be replicated in different regions, and also they can also, be amplified through different ways. Yeah, so these are my, my thoughts on these young entrepreneur, and also whatever we've done in terms of research with NGOs and other institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. As you briefly mentioned the role of young people in climate finance, maybe it would be interesting to ask you, what kind of role do you see the young people playing in climate finance, especially because the goal of this youth summit is maybe to write this manifesto? Like, what kind of proposal would you have, ideas?
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of manifesto, we've been working on one last night for long hours in terms of young people in Yongo. So it's very important that when you're writing the manifesto, you make your demands more actionable, and you rightly point out on which entity that you want your policy demands to be addressed from when in the manifesto, and by when. So make it very explicit, using the language that would be understood by policy makers. And also, once it's out there in terms of the manifesto, you need to know how do you communicate about it. Is it just like you're sharing it, or you're having bilaterals, with organizations so that they can take your point into consideration and make sure that they are also being adopted. And what role can we have if you are in the room and you belong to constituencies affiliated to UNFCCC, be it, they have different observer constituency, and Yongo is one. We are the children and youth constituency of UNFCCC. And in our working group in finance, we follow, all the work programs, the new collective, the new quantified goals, and Article 6, Article 2.1c, loss and damage funding, and so on. So we provide inputs throughout the year in all the submissions that is requested by UNFCCC. So we make sure that we are there, and we try to also send, a representative to technical expert dialogues. So it's one way that you can influence, negotiations and work programs by joining constituencies, observer constituencies. So it can be youth, it can be business, it can be research constituency at the UNFCCC. So if you are keen to influence these processes in terms of policy making, so I would advise you to look at the observer list of constituencies, and then to be able to join one of them according to your interests, of course. And then on national and regional level, you also have chances to join coalitions, that would work on drafting manifestos on these levels. And this is also done through Yongo, where we have local conferences and regional conferences aligned to draft manifestos specific to, different thematic areas, which is relevant just for the region and for also the local level. So I would say that you have a lot in your hand that you could use.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would also ask Marie if you want to add something to this question, or
I can barely add anything.
Yeah,
I would repeat that you've got it in your hands. You have this big voice that you can put out there, and like the room is full of decision makers of the future, and it would be great to have decision makers in the future that have financial literacy, that know how the system works, because we're lacking that right now at all steps of the way, not only in society in general, but in politics and in specific. So it would be great if you could go out there with financial literacy and change things.
Are there any specific courses or educational programs you could maybe recommend if one were to be interested in finance? Because I think it's always quite difficult to only look on the internet or in books. It's very, very broad where to start and how good these courses or
I mean, Karishma has a master in climate finance, so maybe she's more able to answer that question. In general, I think you should look into how companies are financed, how they get their money, and also like how the public money part of finance works. Like do economics 101 basically, and then look into the specifics of this climate finance part.
Thank you.
If I may add, very briefly, just taking 30 seconds, the UNCC Learn have also a lot of content on greening the economy, 3 courses that you could start with: greening the economy, carbon taxing, and so on. They might have added more, but it's very insightful. It would take like 2 hours or 2 hours and a half, but that could be a good start point to start with, capacity building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Verena, do you have anything to add for the role of young people, or for courses, certificates, anything that you can recommend? If anybody is interested in becoming more expert in climate finance?
I don't have any courses or anything like that to suggest. I hope people stay active. I hope it's just really important that people stay involved, whether that is on the financial topic or not. It's like we need all, like not just young people, to be honest. I feel like also everybody else has to step up if we want to still solve this problem. But of course, it's very helpful if young people also drive this issue, because I feel like there's certainly a different political awareness about climate change specifically among young people. And I think my last advice is actually a little bit, I mean, I'm not an economist, I've just done a lot on economics, and I think my advice is you should get into the nitty-gritty of finance, because in the end it is often about money, and it's good to be financially literate and to kind of be able to look where to not take always what they say at face value, but be able to judge what is greenwashing, where does the money actually go, because the money in the end has effects. And I would encourage to kind of not believe most finance people too much. Like there's a lot of talk about at the moment, both in climate finance, but also in development finance, and the entire debate is about how can the big gap be filled, the big climate gap. And yes, is a very big gap, like this is for sure, but it often leads to very simplistic talk about how private capital can be mobilized to solve all of our problems. It's very important to have in mind that private capital is driven by profits, and this is because they invest, and it's I'm not saying like that they shouldn't be driven into more renewables than investing into fossil fuels. It's good that there are all the regulations that Marie also talked about. It's important to set boundaries and to steer it, but I feel like it's good to be cautious and not think that always like the big public interests actually overlap with private capital. In most cases, they do not. Private capital has to be steered and regulated very well in order for it to do a job that is actually in public interest. And I would recommend to be more skeptical than current mainstream discourse about this.
Thank you.
So is there even a possibility for capitalism to be green, or would you say no?
Was that for me or for whom?
Maybe for all of you guys, for anyone who wants to answer this question.
I personally don't think it is possible. No, capitalism always wants to grow, always wants to have more added value. I don't think it's possible to live in planetary boundaries in this system, because capitalism is driven by creating exchange values and values that can be sold, and it's not within the system to actually put people and planet nature first. And I must say I'm an old school person about this. Like with Karl Marx, I'd say it's not the fault also of the capitalists working in it. It's also not that people who work in finance are mean or anything like that. There are structures that make them act like that. You have to invest where the profit is. Otherwise you go out of business. I don't think it's not like a moral problem on a personal level. I think it's indeed a structural problem of capitalism, and I think to solve climate change and also to solve the biodiversity crisis and many others, I don't think we can do it with a system that is so growth focused.
Thank you.
Okay, nodding as well. So considering the time, we would like to proceed with your questions. So I hope that you collected some. Boom.
We know that for do something to improve the problem with the climate crisis, we need a lot of money. So where could we get this money from?
Is there anyone who wants to answer this question specifically? Where do we get the money from? A difficult question, I assume.
I mean, I can go ahead. I think Verena already said something about the World Bank and other institutions like that, and I think we have to be realistic here. Like, a lot of money out there is private, so a lot of money that will help solve the climate crisis will come from private institutions. So we need to be realistic that this is the system we're living in, right? So we will. My starting point is trying to guide that money, trying to make it better, and obviously work on the dominance of that private funds. But it's out there and it's going the wrong way, so we have to stop it going the wrong way and guide it the right way.
Thank you. Other questions?
Who's gonna guide the people to the right direction?
I mean, as Verena said, obviously right now profit is guiding it. So one way you can do is to make destruction unprofitable. That's what carbon tax is doing, and that's the route they are going. They're like just market-based, make it unprofitable so that they change their decisions. Other routes obviously are politics, regulation. Don't allow them to do stuff. Not only like make it expensive, but just tell them not to do. So that's politics. That's like what we can do with our voices to influence the regulation on what is okay to do and what's not okay.
Okay.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the taxonomy issue again, because I think like it's important to fight that those wrong taxonomies everywhere. And do you have any like project or like maybe also youth-led initiative where we can join in fighting those initiatives? Maybe not only in the EU, where I know there's your lawsuit, but also on a global scale.
So I can basically only tell you about the EU, unfortunately. I know that besides us, there are other NGOs working on that. So there's a separate lawsuit actually going on, a third lawsuit as well from country Austria, so not NGOs. You can obviously support the lawsuits. It's kind of hard to campaign on lawsuits, to be honest, because like we brought people to the streets last year when it was still up for a decision. We had this big Not My Taxonomy movement that's still existing, but like the nature of lawsuits is that it takes a while and it's hard to can't go to the court and tell them to do stuff. Like we still believe in the court's decision, obviously. So yeah, that's kind of a bad answer, I'm sorry. We will keep on working on that. We will keep on pushing on social media, trying to change the perception as well, because it's the perception of, for the EU taxonomy, the perception of nuclear power and gas as those transition fuels. That's not only in the taxonomy, but everywhere. Everyone's like, that's basically transition washing, if you want. It's greenwashing and different variety. Just say that the things you want to keep, well, you only have to keep them for a couple more years for transition, because we're not ready yet. And you're channeling a lot of money into stuff that shouldn't be there in a couple of years, and that could be well spent on other stuff like renewables.
Then we had another question.
You will probably repeat yourselves, but I think it will be fantastic for our audience, which is mainly youth, I would really like to know from your own perspective, that I know we have basically civil society here, but we have three fantastic speakers that have different perspectives in relation with the private sector, in relation with the policymakers and the processes to bring into the papers what we need. And then from the perspective of the civil society, what do you think it's the main challenge in the climate finance gap that we are envisioning, / which of this is the most important to you that we should be addressing with priority and urgency?
Maybe, Verena, you would like to start?
So I understood what is, from our perspective, the main challenge with regards to the climate finance gap, right? I think if I have to, if I have to break it down, for me, it's actually a lack of political will, and a lack of political will primarily also in the countries that are primarily responsible for climate change. First of all, to do all the proper actions on cutting emissions in their own countries, right? This is the major action. Like, before we think about funding climate finance everywhere, like, we have to cut emissions, now. There you can already see the lack of political will to come up with ambitious programs. But that also extends to the climate finance realm. And I want to say, I'm very critical of this entire process of let's just fill the gap with the trillions the private sector has. I know the money is in the private sector. It's not that I'm not acknowledging the realities. I'm just it has also not worked in the past to mobilize this money for fruitful and good investments. At the moment, I personally don't really see how it is going to be done. Interest rates are super high. Nobody wants to invest, especially also in global south countries, for adaptation. This is off limits. So we have to come up with other real solutions, and there I see kind of the political obstacle. And I just want to say one other thing, because I worked on it a lot, and you might have heard it. I will not go into the details. You can write me an email if you actually want to know the nerdy details. But one example for me is this discussion about special drawing rights. It's a very technical little instrument, but it's basically kind of the only mechanism that exists on a global scale to produce new liquidity, so in a form new money, if you want to say. The International Monetary Fund and all the countries took the decision in response to the COVID-19 crisis to create 650 billion of these special drawing rights. And there were a lot of hopes that because the world community was reminded again of this instrument, that you could use this way more to finance climate action as well on a world scale. And there was a lot of debate about it. It was also before that already. There were several COPs in the history where people tried to put it on. Now Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, had it in her Bridgetown agenda as a very big topic to use these. But at the moment, the debate is a little bit dead, and it's because rich countries don't want it, because they kind of didn't use the momentum. They kind of cancelled all the talks about creating a special mitigation trust, although this kind of money would not come with any costs to them. So I think we really have to tackle their political will. And if you want to know more about special drawing rights, you can write me an email. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty; it gets very technical. But it's a good example of where rich countries didn't even take the right actions, although it didn't come with any costs to them. For me.
I would give the word to you, Karishma. Do you have an answer to the question as well?
Yes, I think what can be changed, in the very short term, is accessibility of this funding, as I mentioned. We do have the funding being mobilized. It's not sufficient, yes, we all know it, but who is benefiting from this funding, and what is, the impact of the existing funding that we have? This is what I would stress on needs to be changed, because when we talk about the global south, we have seen, the gaps in there. I have told you about how, the access is for different entities. For example, the GCF or GEF only give to accredited entities in the country. And those accredited entities are most of the time ministry departments, that is the government, get the money. And then for that money to go into local community, those local community don't have the capacity, to access those fundings because it's the funding application is way too long. They don't have the knowledge how to fill in the project proposal, the budget, and also they don't have their proper administration, like they don't keep their accounts for 2 years or 3 years that needs to be submitted, things that needs to be changed immediately, and this could be done so that those climate financing that is there could be made more accessible. Same thing when we are talking about green bonds. I give my example in Mauritius. I know that green bonds was introduced on the stock exchange, and then the first green bond that was issued was 4 years after. So you see, you can say that in the global south, you're bringing initiatives, instruments that are sustainable, that are innovative, that could be useful for the country to mobilize the finance, but then it's not happening. Because the investors, they are not aware of how to use, the green bonds, or they are afraid, they do not know how it needs to be rolled out. So beyond just, mobilizing, it's a whole ecosystem that needs to change with climate finance. And this is about awareness, education, and capacity building of diverse stakeholders, from investors in the global south to making it, more accessible in terms of bureaucracy. Yeah, I think the technical bugs are coming up again. I won't stay much longer in between you and probably your dinner. You can also catch me through email if you want to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I will lastly give the word to you, Marie, and then I think then we will end the Q&A session.
Yeah, so my point of view is obviously always private finance. So I'd like to say I guess it will be much easier in the global north because so many things are already profitable, like Felix already said. Things got cheap for renewables, etc. It will be much, much harder to do the same things in the global south. And referring to what Verena said, we have seen that things have not worked out. And it's really hard to be hopeful that new solutions will be better, and it's really crucial to check these developments that are ongoing, like those innovations on financial stuff like debt for nature swaps, etc., to check that they're not exploiting the global south again and again, and that we stay in the same system, and that the people that are already affected the most are exploited again for that. So that's the major thing, and I think most of it will have to go through grants, obviously, and then we have to check that what is happening on climate finance for the global south is working out for people in the global south as well.
Thank you very much. And this will be the end of our Q&A session. And
so I would like to give the word for one last time to each of you three. Unfortunately, the screen also went to sleep now, so I have to turn around to see you, Verena and Karishma. So, yeah, please, one final word from you to our audience, and maybe if you want to share a call for action, please go ahead. Verena.
I don't feel like I have much to add, to be honest. I mean, I feel like I've said it. I've said most of the things. I personally am very curious about, or if you want to look where some bits, at least, of the climate finance architecture are being discussed a lot more, or of the multilateral official architecture, then look next week for the annual meetings that are happening in Marrakesh. The World Bank praises itself as like the big reform annual meetings. There will also be several counter summits and counter protests. I think it will be an interesting debate, and that's what I'm at least very excited to follow next week. This is not a call for action, but I feel like I already told all of you, you have to stay on it. It's great to see that you are active. I hope you stay on it, and I hope you also look at the money and financial bits, because they might be dry and boring, but they are very important in the end.
Thank you. Karishma.
I would say that, very often as young people, we feel very disappointed with how the situation is. And this also affects our mental well-being when, you're doing advocacy, or you're even like pushing for an agenda, or you're putting forward your policy demands. It's very straining on young people. But whenever you feel like that, it's important that you know that you're surrounded by, peers who are there and fighting with you. And also to think about it's like an ocean. We are just adding like a drop of contribution to it, but see the ripple effect that you can have, and also, be strong, and also have this continuity in whatever you're doing. Yes, so I know how hard it can be for young people to embark on this journey of advocacy, but it's worth it. You're giving back to the society and to the planet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so nice. I don't know. I can only ruin that now. Stay curious. Keep on what you're doing. Finance is not as hard to understand as it seems. Lots of people try to make it seem very complex. It is, but it's not as complex as you could not understand it. You can do it, and it's important to stay on it.
Thank you. So we would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us online and here on stage. I hope all of you learned as much as I did during this very interesting discussion. And sorry again for our technical challenges at the beginning.
We have a gift for the three of you, and
thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to use the microphone so you can hear me too. We have some nice special gifts for our panelists and also for our hosts. We'd like to thank also our panelists over online. You get a certificate of 100 trees for this participation. Thank you so much. You've just supported our main cause by attending. Thank you so much. And just so you know, we are handing you a couple of books and a couple of our chocolates. One of them is vegan, and yeah, we just like to thank you again for being part of this fantastic panel and taking your precious and valuable time, yes, to share your inputs with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again to all of you here in Frankfurt, and to Verena and to Karishma. Have a wonderful evening, or I don't know, night. I think, Karishma, where you are, middle of the night, maybe?
No, I'm based in UK, so...
okay.
You are far behind me. I'm behind you, you are ahead of me.
Okay, so you have still more of the evening. Enjoy your evening, enjoy your night, and for all of you here, see you tomorrow.